Happy. Happy was a nickname given to a poor young kid in the streets of California. But happy was one of the emotions that he probably felt the least. You see, he was born into extreme poverty with limited resources, the son of undocumented farm workers. He grew up in a neighborhood surrounded by gangs and surrounded by violence. And unfortunately for him, at a very young age, he was the victim of abuse. The type of abuse that no child should ever have to suffer through. But that abuse made him into a very angry and aggressive teenager. And that anger manifested in him in the way he would interact with anything that challenged him. He simply wanted to destroy anything that crossed his path. He wanted to destroy it completely. The problem with that is that in his neighborhood, that type of aggression was a commodity. And before you knew it, the gangs came knocking on his door, and he got sucked into that lifestyle. Now, I know what most people would say. Oh, that poor kid, he's just going to become another statistic. That poor kid. He's probably going to start a cycle of dysfunction that he's going to pass on to his family, and is going to continue for generations. And in most cases, those people would be accurate. But life is funny sometimes, because life has a way of giving second chances, even to those people that least expect it. Several decades later, Happy is long gone. And in his place stands the man you see before you, Pedro, a corporate executive. I've been a corporate leader for over 20 years now. I've traveled 500,000 miles. I've stepped onto 5 continents. I've developed hundreds of leaders all across the globe. I went from being a leader in the streets to being a leader in the boardroom. And the funny thing is that when I go back and I look at it, I didn't realize that those same skills that I was using to survive in the streets would become highly transferable to my professional life. But they did. Now, I know what a lot of you are probably asking. Well, I didn't go through those things. I don't have those skills. I didn't have those hardships. But nothing could be farther from the truth. I can guarantee that each and every one of you has had specific scenarios, specific experiences, even specific challenges that have given you leadership skills that you're probably not even aware of at this moment. Because I can assure you that leadership doesn't only exist in corporate boardrooms or in businesses. Leadership exists in our communities, in our homes, in our schools, in our churches. Leadership is everywhere, and leadership is universal. The good thing is that I have done the research, and I get to see what it's been implemented. And in 2018, they did a study. And in that study, they were able to analyze that 90% of leadership skills are actually learned through real-life scenarios, through challenges, through experiences, and only 10% are actually learned from education or training. So what does that tell you? You already have it in you. You already know, without even knowing, without even having the details. It's already inside of us. Back when I was happy, I didn't realize that those hardships that I was going through were also providing me with some of the best leadership skills that I would later apply in the corporate world. But they did. Now, one of the very first lessons I learned as a leader that became critical was the importance of building trust. In the streets, trust was everything. If you didn't have trust, you didn't have anything. But that was the same in the corporate world. You had to build trust. Folks don't follow titles. Folks follow trust. And they only follow leaders they trust and teams they trust. And that becomes critical. And sometimes the journey to building trust starts with a simple gesture. You see, the neighborhood that I grew up in, how you dressed was everything. You know, I grew up in the 90s in California. So how you dressed was everything. When you stepped out of the house, you couldn't be wrinkled. Your dickies had to be creased. Your white shirt had to be pressed. Your hair had to be did, or in my case, my bald head had to be shaven. But you had to come out like that. Even to this day, I struggle. I can't leave the house wrinkled at all. You can ask my wife. I even iron my socks because that stuck with me. But the one piece of clothing, the one article that was the most important in our lives was always our shoes. Our shoes had to be clean. And back in the 90s and back in California, the shoe of preference was the Nike Cortez. We could probably remember the Nike Cortez, but more specifically in my neighborhood, it was the white Nike Cortez. That's me right there with my white Nike Cortezes. Those were everything. But they had to be super clean, they had to be super white, because you couldn't step out into the neighborhood with dirty shoes, because the older homeboys were gonna come talk to you, and that was gonna be uncomfortable. There was a time I was hanging out at the park, and there was a young kid that had been hanging out with us, and I was giving him a lot of education, trying to keep him clean, making sure he wasn't gonna get involved in things. And one day he shows up at the park, and he's looking pretty dapper. He's got his dicky cutoffs with a little crease in him. He's got a fresh little fade. He's looking good. He's feeling good. But I take a look at him, and I realize something. I look down at his shoes. I say, oh, no, those are not acceptable. Those are not pristine. Those are not super white. So instead of embarrassing, I pull him to the side, and I say, hey, let me talk to you, homeboy. He's like, what's up, man? Hey, what's going on with you? Why are you dressed like that today? Like, what are you talking about? I said, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You represent the neighborhood now. You got to look good all the time. You represent us. I don't know what you're talking about, man. Look at your shoes, man. And I could see that he was becoming defensive and dismissive to the questions I was asking. But as a leader, because I was already a leader at a young age, I had to keep asking the questions. I said, no, it's not acceptable. Those shoes make you look like a hobo. What's going on with you? And immediately I could see the impact that had on him. And I could see he became deflated. His shoulders sunk down, and all the air was drained out of his puffed out chest. All the energy left his body, and he looked at the ground, and he couldn't even look at me. He said, the thing is, Pedro, like, you know, we're only at home with my mom right now, and my dad just got locked up, so my mom's the only one making money, and she can't afford to buy me shoes. You know, these are my cousin's shoes, man, but it's all I got. I saw that impact in his life, and I saw how that changed him. So immediately as a leader, I took a step back and I said, I need to change my approach. It needs to be different. So immediately I reached into my pocket and I pulled out $100. I said, here, this is what I want you to do. Here's $50. I want you to go to the outlets and buy yourself brand new Cortezes. Yes, in the 90s, Cortezes were $50. I want you to buy yourself brand new Cortezes, the white ones. The other $50, I want you to go home and I want you to give them to your mom, because that's what's going to help out with the bills. When you're done with that, I want you to come see me, because you're going to go to work with me. I'm going to make sure that you have money in your pocket going forward. You're my little homie, and nobody's going to make fun of you going forward. And with that little act, I started to build the trust and the relationship with him that would last a lifetime. Now, as I reflect now as a leader, and I've grown some time, I always look at these situations and say, what did I learn from that? What leadership skills did I learn? And I realize now that as I'm asking him these questions, and he's becoming dismissive and not wanting to answer and kind of skirt the issue, but I keep on asking those questions and why, and tell me more specifics. What I'm doing is I'm actually asking relative probing questions, and I'm doing root cause analysis at the same time. Both great leadership attributes. But more importantly, when I responded and I changed my approach, when he sunk back and he thought he was being attacked or he just didn't feel good, and I changed my approach to that interaction, that's called emotional intelligence. And that's one of the greatest leadership attributes that one can have. It's what separates the good leaders from the great leaders. Now, another leadership lesson I learned is probably one of the most pivotal ones, and I would say it is the biggest differentiator between someone that is successful and someone that is not successful. And I'll tell you right now, it's not education, it is not tools, it is not money, it is not even resources. The number one differentiator is persistence. The ability to persist in the face of any obstacle, to keep pushing forward no matter what happens. You see in the streets, you fall down a lot, you fall down all the time. But you gotta keep on getting up, you gotta keep on punching. The same thing in the corporate world. Sometimes you're running a program or you're on a project, you miss the deliverables, something happens on the measurables. Well, you gotta have the ability to regroup and reassess and come back even stronger. You gotta have the ability to persist. Well, my journey with persistence didn't start in the boardroom. My journey with persistence started in a jail cell. You see, when I was young, I wasn't there when my daughter was born. I was in a jail cell. So I didn't meet her when she was a baby. I met her a little bit more grown. And I remember she was months old when they told me, hey, we're gonna go visit you. And I got super nervous behind that. I said, all right, I'll be ready. But in my mind, as I'm in my cell and I'm with my cellie, I'm thinking like, what is my little girl gonna think of me? What does she look like? Is she gonna love me? Is she gonna know I'm her dad? I'm thinking all those things because I hadn't seen her, and it'd been like 6 months at this point. And I remember the night before, I stayed up shaving my head. I was even ironing my pants, because even in jail, you can't be wrinkled. That's a no-no. You gotta put them under your bed, though. There's no iron. And I remember even the homeboys snuck in some aqua velva for me. I'm aging myself a little bit right now. They snuck in some aqua velva for me because I didn't want to smell like jail for my little girl. That wasn't acceptable. I got up early the next morning. I went out to visit, and I remember that they brought in the babysit with her inside of it, and she was all waddled up. And I just saw this little round bundle of joy looking at me. And she had this curly, black, matted hair, more hair than I've ever had, but it was all curly and black and matted, and she had these rosy, chubby cheeks, and she was beautiful. And I remember they unwrapped her, and she took a minute to look around the room, and then we locked eyes, and she smiled at me, and I fell in love. I felt something I'd never felt in my life at that point, because all I had felt was anger, and she took that away from me. And I knew at that moment that I needed to change. Because right behind that was shame and embarrassment. How could my little girl meet me here? How could be this for the first place that she sees me be in jail? So I knew I had to make a change. Immediately, I started planning. I said, I need to get out of here. I need to go back to school. I need to get my GED. I need to get a job. And I need to leave the gangs. I needed to leave that life because she is my purpose. And my purpose is more important than the gangs. It's more important than anything. And then when I went back to my cell and I started reflecting on things, and I remember I was in my bunk and thinking about stuff, and I started seeing the vision of what it looked like once I fixed everything, that I was going to raise her, and I was going to take her to school, and I was going to get up in the morning and do her ponytails and get everything ready, and I was going to protect her because I wasn't protected. I needed to do that. And I got out and I did exactly that. I did all of that. I did every single tool. I left everything behind. I didn't care about the consequences because she was my life. Years later, when I would reflect on that, I would think about that and what I learned from that interaction. What did that teach me? But when I was in jail and I started thinking about, I need to go back, I need to go to school, I need to get an education, I need to leave the gangs, I need to get a job, that's action planning. Those are strategic tactics. I would use that later on in my corporate journey. And when I would sit down in that bunk and I was thinking about everything that could happen, and I was envisioning all of that, that's out of the box thinking. Well, first because I was in a box, so I'm thinking outside of that box. But secondly, I was having strategic vision. I was seeing the bigger picture. And those skills had served me so well in the corporate world. And I learned that in jail. I learned that from that interaction, from one of the darkest moments of my life. That's actually the day after I got out of jail. That's the first time I really got to hold my little girl. Now, as we move forward, one of the next leadership lessons I want to share with you is one of the most critical, one of the most powerful ones that you can have. It's the one that really stands out for me, and that is the power of authenticity, being your authentic self no matter the situation. See, when I was growing up in the streets, everybody knew me as Pedro, and I didn't care if you liked me or not. I feared nobody. Why do I care your opinion of me? And I carried myself in that manner, and I pushed that in that manner. But when I joined the corporate world, it was different, because I was Pedro with the tattoos. I was different. And there wasn't a lot of Pedros. There was a lot of Jeffs and a lot of Chads, but there wasn't a lot of Pedros. So I made a conscious choice at that point. I started introducing myself as Pete, not Pedro. And it wasn't only that. I started code switching words that I naturally knew how to speak. Enchiladas became enchiladas. Mexico became Mexico. And the worst, Villagran became Villagran. And that's the one that hurt me the most. Because Villagran was my father's name, it is my family's name, and I adored my father. But I felt the need to fit in. I felt inadequate, like I needed to be different. Now, don't get me wrong, the teams that I built when I was Pete, they were really good teams. There's really good people on those teams, and I love those people. But at the same time, I recognized that those weren't my best teams. They definitely weren't. So I needed to make a change. And what I wound up doing is I ended up taking a lot more teams. I worked a lot in Latin America. I ended up taking teams in Guatemala. I ended up taking teams in Honduras, in Bogotá, Colombia. And there I could be my authentic self. So I went back to calling myself Pedro. I went back to being unapologetically me. The person that was raised in the valley, the person that was raised by my father. And then it all clicked. Those teams started performing at such a high level. They broke records that still stand to this day. I found my niche. My company sent me to Hawaii. I accomplished so much when I started being fake and I started being authentic and real. And that was a huge difference maker for me. So I'll never go back to that. I always introduce myself as Pedro. That's just a standard for me going forward. Now I have to take time and think about what are the lessons that Happy taught me. What are the lessons that poor little scared boy taught me? Because they were a lot. But the most important lesson that he taught me is that leadership is not something that is given. Leadership is something that is learned. And you learned it sometimes through hardships, through challenges, through experiences in your life. But ultimately, they can make you the best version of yourself. Now, my challenge to you is that next time you think about applying for that new job, or you're thinking about opening up a business, or maybe you're even thinking about running for office, and you don't think you have the leadership skills to make it happen, I really want you to take some time and reflect and go back in your life and think about all those moments that gave you pause, all the conflict in your life, all the challenges that came to you that you handled in quiet, because we handled the majority of those in quiet. But I want you to think about that and really look at what did you learn during that time, because I can assure you, you're going to find little golden nuggets that you're going to be able to apply in reaching your goals. Because if you're that person that is full of tattoos with that colorful history, I can assure you, you've probably gone through more diversity than most people. You probably have a lot more drive and ambition than most people. And if you're that person that comes from a low-income situation, guess what? You're great at budgeting. You're great at financial planning. Why? Because you've had to do it your whole life. And if you're a mom, shoot, if you're a mom, you got it all. You can do it everything. You're probably amazing at project management. You're probably even better at strategic planning. And you're probably the best at risk management. Why? Because you do it every single day. Even in those situations where you have to get all the family together and start planning those trips to Disney World, I can guarantee you, you are executing all those leadership skills on one project. So thank you for that. Now, the biggest lesson for me and the biggest thing that I learned, and I'll leave you with this, is that leadership isn't something that is reserved for a select few or for only certain places. Leadership is universal. Thank you.